Good evening, dear audience. I'm very happy to introduce my today's special guest, as always, Mr. Charpentier, who has a privilege and actually always displays his commitment to give a speech in front of the audience for the Media Informed TV channel. Thank you very much, Mr. Charpentier, for being here.
Thank you for having me, Mr. Kациним.
Okay, Mr. Shaprentier, so we are going to, as always, to discuss several topics which basically are generated through the war which is now undergo between Russia and Ukraine. You know that Russian army has sheltered many bombs over Ukraine, rockets during the last week, and more than 20 people died during this missiles attack, and Russia did it in a very open way in the midday, and actually destroyed several buildings, not several, but many buildings destroyed during last week in Ukraine. How US media reacted towards this situation, how they received Russian attacks over Ukraine, because I would like to stress that these attacks were made not in the night, not against some military bases. It was these attacks were committed against the civilians who do not participate in the conflict. They are not a member of Ukrainian troops. Basically, they became victims of Russian aggression. So please, Mr. Shaprentier, you're welcome.
Well, the American people and a lot of government officials are obviously disgusted with these war crimes. Putin is desperate, right? Because he thought that he would be able to take Ukraine over in just a couple of days, right? So I think that now, I mentioned this before. I don't think he initially planned on targeting civilians. But now I think at this point he's desperate, and he thinks that it will. He thinks that it'll stop Ukrainians from fighting their country, but that will never happen, and it's just bringing more condemnation, in the Western world. So really, I think that his acts of terrorism are really defeating the purpose, of him targeting civilians.
Mr. Charpentier, obviously around such events, usually many conspiracies arise. And one of the conspiracy theory, which I personally heard during last week, was that actually Putin did this purposefully. Why? Because Putin wanted Ukrainians to display their bad emotions towards Russians. He wanted Ukrainians to hate Russians even more for all violations, for all crimes which Russian army committed here in Ukraine. Why Putin needs this? Because for Putin, it is very important to show to Western elites, to Western countries, that Ukrainians, they hate Russians, Russian nationality, and this goes against human rights conventions, the perception of human rights in Europe and in Western world generally. So how can you provide the support to the nation which actually hates another nation, you know. So what do you think? Is it really possible, and is it really true that Putin could be so naive to think that it is possible to boost this argument in the West that West has to abandon to provide Ukrainians special equipment because the Ukrainians, they were antagonizing against Russians? What do you think?
That's a good question. So you're saying that you think that Putin is committing these atrocities so that it'll make Ukrainians want to basically do the same?
Well, basically, Putin's trying to say to the West, look, whom you are actually helping, they're not the victims, they're the people who hate others because of their nationality. So
Okay,
maybe you know, Putin's trying to play this card, because then this argument becomes illogical, because for many Westerns, we understand that many Western politicians, they are very pro-Putin, but they can't go against their societies, so they support Ukraine. But once they have a picture on their screens how Ukrainians hate Russians, it will be an argument and an opportunity to change the mood of European societies, and Ukraine from the image of victim will be turned out to the image of, let's say, the country and peoples who hate other people.
Well, I have seen, you know, Ukrainian civilians in the news saying that they hate Russians and so forth and so on, but I think something like that is completely natural, you know, completely normal, and I don't think, really, I don't think that will really have any, you know, hold any weight. You know,
yeah, but you're intellectual. You're intellectual. I mean, it won't affect intellectuals. But if you take ordinary people, they have very short memory. So maybe Russian dictator Mr. Putin is really relying on the short memory of Westerns.
No, I don't think so. I think that the Western narrative is still very, very strong in Ukraine's favor, and they still see this as you know, Russian aggression and nothing less. And you know, I think that President Zelensky is doing a great job with helping to control that sort of narrative, and I don't see that changing. The only thing that I see is perhaps Americans just becoming wary, because the war could last for a year or longer, and I think Americans do have short attention spans. So to me, that's you know, I would worry about that the most, and so I think that Zelensky needs to continue to you know, drive home his narrative, and you know, the Western media needs to keep showing the atrocities that are occurring in Ukraine to the average American audience, and they are doing that. But you know, for how long? You know, how long will that last? I mean, for sure, it will. It won't be in the news as much in a year from now. But again, I think that the more atrocities Putin commits, then the more the war will be in the news.
Mr. Shaprentier, last week I read a very interesting article which was published on in Foreign Affairs. Foreign Affairs is a very established scientific outlet in the United States. And I was shocked because the professor of MIT University, one of the most prestigious universities in the United States, He's a professor of political science in MIT University. So he actually argued that Westerns has to abandon the support of Ukraine because it really fertile, because you can't win Putin, you can only annoy Putin, and he can use a nuclear weapon, and it affects Western's economy. Also, I was really shocked when this professor from MIT University, he proposed Ukraine to sacrifice the part of its territory towards Russia to get a peace deal. But we know from history that it's not possible to get a peace deal with Russia because Russia always go against international law, always go against its own words. So basically, Russia is a state which really is an owner of their words. They give words and they take back their words. And also, very surprised because I can't imagine that this professor gives his own flat or house to somebody else, or part of his house or flat to somebody else. Let's say, some homeless person comes and would like to, stay in his house or even live in his house. So he says, okay, please, you can take this house or flat. I don't really need this. So it's not possible. So I don't understand why this professor is trying to, let's say, advise Ukraine to sacrifice part of his territory. There is no politician in Ukraine who would agree to sacrifice the part of Ukrainian territory because it won't be received in a good way by Ukrainians. So why actually we hear such opinions in the United States and in the European Union? Is it a Russian influence? Or this is really these are really convictions by part of Western intellectuals that Ukraine has to sacrifice part of its own territory in the sake of stopping Putin?
I think that only Eastern European politicians and intellectuals and even people, I think ordinary people know that he's not going to stop in Ukraine. And if he does, if there isn't an agreement, he'll only break that agreement. And it's very difficult for Western people who come from Western culture to really understand that, to really understand a mind like Putin's. And so, again, I think that Ukraine needs to make that decision as to whether they want to give up some land and negotiate or not. And
yeah, but I can tell you from
and obviously Ukrainians don't agree with that idea. So I think that the American government and a lot of government authority, American authorities, they want what Ukrainians want. So, and Zelensky doesn't want to give up any land either. So I think that as long as I think that the American government's going to follow what the Ukrainian people want, and what the Ukrainian authorities want, Ukrainian leaders.
Mr. Charpentier, during the last interview, we actually discussed the topic of about the soft power, about states which use soft power, and how actually the state can exercise soft power, and actually what does soft power mean. So I know that due to the shortage of time, you could not throw into discussion some points regarding soft power. So you're welcome. Just share with us your view over soft power in the modern world.
Well, my view is slightly different from you know, its current usage definition. For me, for instance, I think that China does use soft power, and I think that they use it in a just way. I think that a lot of their policies are reasonable. However, when I said that China doesn't have soft power, it's because I don't think that they use it in a way that's effective. And I think part of the reason is because you know, the West has a monopoly on the media, right? So that's what I was, you know, I don't think that Ukraine has soft power, that they're able to use soft power. And I think a lot of that is because they weren't always able to control the narrative, you know, their country's narrative, you know, what the country's about and everything. And I think that now that Ukraine is in the media and has, actually, I think now Ukraine is able to demonstrate a lot of its influence. I wouldn't say really just soft power, but I would say just their influence in general.
So you mean now Ukraine has a moral standing, has a moral power which Ukraine can exercise in order to have more support from the West, you know? So you're talking about moral power as something which is different from the hard power, so the power of weapons, and the soft power, the power of, let's say, economic and financial devices. Yeah, so you're talking about moral power, moral standing.
Yes, exactly.
Mr. Charpentier, thank you very much. As always, a very competent point of view. Mr. Charpentier, American novelist. Actually, I forget to tell to an audience that you're a novelist, but probably after our 12 interviews, our audience, Ukrainian audience, already aware that you're a novelist. So thank you very much, Mr. Charpentier, for being here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for having me again.